Well, hey everybody, I'm in the Belvedere Memorial Cemetery here in San Angelo, Texas. I want to talk about a case that happened when a young couple vanished on the 4th of July in 1988, only to reappear a few months later as skeletons beneath the brush of a forgotten Texas lake bed. They were 16-year-old Shane Paul Stewart and 18-year-old Sally McNelly. They were two teenagers in love, trying to escape a life that was tangled in secrets, drugs, and a group that was rumored to be dabbling in ritualistic darkness. They handed a gun to police. They named names. They even said that they were afraid they'd be killed. And then they disappeared. And the question of what happened in San Angelo, Texas on that scorching summer night in 1988 has haunted this little town for more than 35 years. Their bodies were found months later, both shot execution style. The case, it's never been solved. The question became, was this a satanic cult that did this? Or was it a cover-up by local law enforcement? Or something even worse? You know, this isn't just another unsolved murder case. It's the story about teenagers who are trying to do the right thing and the people who may have silenced them to protect a terrible truth. Well, welcome to Profiling Evil. I'm in Texas doing a little bit of follow-up work on the old Warren Jeffs case and visiting that Yearning for Zion Ranch just about 50 miles south of where I'm standing today. Now, if you're coming to CrimeCon in September, I'm going to be talking about that case in detail, and I hope to share some pretty interesting things. So make sure you're signing up for that. And tell them Profiling Evil sent you. And before we get started, please take a moment, hit that like and subscribe button, and make sure that you have your notifications turned on so that you don't miss any of our episodes. I really hope I get the chance to meet with my in-house counsel, Michelle Morris, while I'm here in Texas. If you remember, she's the daughter of a Texas Ranger, and somebody that I consider to be a close friend. In fact, she lined me up to spend the day today with Sheriff Nick Hanna, a retired Texas Ranger who ran the criminal investigation against Warren Jeffs. He oversaw the takedown of the FLDS in one of the biggest rescues in our country. Now, I'm going to be meeting with him here in this county where he happens to be the sheriff in just a few minutes. But I wanted to stop by the cemetery here and tell you a little bit more about Shane and Sally. It occurred here in Tom Green, Texas County, Sheriff Hanna's county. Now, the case has it all: young love, cult rumors, missing evidence, accusations that somebody wearing a badge might have had something to hide, everything. So we're going to unravel decades of silence and explore what it really means when good kids fall into dangerous company. What happens when the people they turn to for help might be part of the problem? You know, there's something about West Texas heat. I'm trying to catch just a little bit of shade here. It's unrelenting. And back in 1988, it seemed to bake more than just the soil. It was baking secrets into the desert brush that surrounds San Angelo. There were secrets about two teenagers, a dangerous crowd of people, and the night that the fireworks lit up the sky while Shane and Sally vanished without a trace. It was Independence Day, 1988, and the day marked a poignant reunion for Shane and Sally. Now, both had recently returned here to their hometown of San Angelo, rekindling a relationship that had been on pause for a couple of months. Tragically, this would be the last time that they would be seen alive. Now, Sally didn't tell her mom she was sneaking off with Shane to watch the annual fireworks display over at Lake Nassworthy. It's just west of here. Now, after the fireworks, though, The couple grabbed some fast food in town and they made their way north to a favorite spot. And I thought I'd drive by that Whataburger where they stopped, but they made their way to O.C. Fisher Lake. Now, it's only about 6 to 7 miles away, and we know that they made it there because a fisherman actually observed them in a heated discussion out on in the area overlooking the lake. They were surrounded by a group of people who had a pickup truck with those bright lights shining down on top of them. Now, the couple expressed a desire to distance themselves from the rabble-rousers, and they were hinting at deeper troubles. Well, the following morning, Shane's car was discovered abandoned near the lake, where they were seen. Inside were the remnants of fast food that they grabbed, that fast food that they stopped at the Whataburger. Now, Shane's car keys were on the dashboard, and that's a detail that still sends chills down my spine because there were no signs of struggle, no blood, no notes, just two kids who disappeared. Now, initially, according to all the reports, responding deputies didn't see any signs of struggle, and that led them to consider the possibility that the teens had simply run away. Now, I don't know about you, but I'm still scratching my head at how those investigators could have come to that conclusion, given the fact that their mode of transportation, Shane's burnt orange 1980 Chevrolet Camaro, something that he prized, was still sitting in the parking area by a picnic bench. There was no indication that this couple had money, nor was there any indication that they packed any additional clothing. Yet still today, the surviving early investigators, who were quoted on video programs, state that they thought they might have eloped. Now, Shane and Sally's parents, they didn't feel that way. And as the days turned into weeks and then into months without any word from the two, their fears increased naturally. Shane's father, a guy named Marshall Stewart, knew better. And so he began the long, lonely vigil of a father who refused to give up. This guy drove everywhere. In fact, on the podcast Shane and Sally by a group called Texas Monthly, Stewart said, quote, "I walked that lake for miles." This guy drove to areas where the kids were believed to have been seen or believed to have hung out. He even tried contacting some of their friends, but nothing surfaced. Now, Stewart's dad didn't wait for detectives to bring him answers. He became a detective himself. Every evening after work, he'd go out and patrol the lake, go to around the community. And when he noticed a yellow or brown Ford truck, something that matched that report of the truck with the big light bar on the roof, the one that was seen harassing the kids by that late night fisherman, he'd start watching them. One night, he saw a truck that he believed might have been the same truck, and a chase ensued. He said they reached speeds of nearly 100 miles per hour, going down this very road that we're on, before the truck exited the park. The truck disappeared into the night and he lost sight of him, never able to find them again. But he remembered the tire tracks he saw near Shane's car. And he started searching all the tires throughout town for something that might match. I mean, this is incredible that this father's doing this. And I can only hope that law enforcement was doing the same. But this was all happening in an era that was known as the Satanic Panic. And each time he heard of any kind of satanic graffiti, he'd go and check it out, hoping that there would be some clues. Now, Stewart's father, Marshall, wasn't on some paranoid witch hunt. He was methodical. In fact, one report suggests that he actually found another body during one of those late night searches. The man he found was later ruled as a victim of a drug overdose, and it was just lucky that he found him. But then, after 4 months, his worst nightmare became a reality. It was in November of 1988, and the skeletal remains of Sally and Shane were found near the Twin Buttes Reservoir in a little area called South Pond. It's a short drive south from the location where their car had been located. And I'm flying the drone over it to give you a sense of the area and how difficult it was for somebody to discover their bodies. This is flat ground and things get hidden really quickly. A hunter's dog picked up the scent near the reservoir, and underneath the pile of brush lay the bones of Sally McNelly. She was still dressed in that same purple blouse she wore on the night she disappeared. And days later, Shane's remains were also found nearby. Shane's dad, Marshall, responded to the scene when he first heard police had found a body. And at first, he was denied access to come into the area, but he demanded to be able to see his son. The sheriff allowed it to happen, and he would later say that his son was dressed exactly like he left the house, just laid out. Well, the medical examiner reported that both Shane and Sally died from gunshot wounds, shotgun wounds. Sally's body was discovered first by some hunters back on November 12th. And I'm unsure how far apart their bodies were from each other, but 2 days later, Shane's body was located. Now, the temperatures were like they are right now in the 80s and 90s. In fact, it's 96 here today. But during those 4 months, not to mention the 50 to 60% humidity in the area, think about how difficult it would be to gather forensic information because, quite frankly, there's rapid decomposition going on, and it's really hard to put together causes of death in cases like this, other than the fact that they could tell that it was a gunshot wound. Well, during the investigation, investigators discovered that Shane and Sally had been involved with a group that was rumored to be engaged in the occult practice. Sally reportedly was more entrenched in this group of teens who were partying in the name of Satan, including these bizarre rituals that were reported. Now, as Shane and Sally's relationship intensified, they actually tried to escape the cult's clutches. And 3 months before their murders, this couple moved into an apartment together while trying to separate from the group's influence. And this is really important because this is where this story kind of takes a turn from a small town heartbreak to a full-blown mystery thriller. Before their deaths, Shane and Sally reported their secret activities in this secret group to police. They said it was more than just parties and drugs, that it was ritualistic in nature. They talked about occult symbols, group sex, threats. And Sally turned over a gun to Tom Green County deputies that she said had been used in a robbery and possibly a murder. Investigators confirmed that the gun was stolen. Now, Deputy Larry Counts would later tell the program Unsolved Mysteries that Sally said there were a lot of drugs, a lot of group sex, and she and her boyfriend might be in danger. Just a few weeks before their deaths, and undoubtedly gripped with fear, Sally also told a friend of hers named Helen that somebody was trying to kill her. Now, the words were dismissed by Helen as kind of a teenage dramatic event, but in hindsight, they were likely a cry for help. Well, Shane's father didn't give up, and later he would learn from locals that this wasn't just a group of bored teens who were lighting candles in the woods. This was a group that was holding rituals in places that some folks called the Devil House, a place investigators would later say was a gathering place that was filled with violent pornography, occult paraphernalia, and even what looked like bondage restraints. I had lunch today with Sheriff Nick Hanna before we headed out to do some looking around, and he actually searched that house. He described it as creepy, with blacked out windows, a mirror surrounded by candles, and a dungeon-like bedroom. This wasn't satanic panic stuff. This was real. It was documented. It was photographed. It was evidence of something bizarre, violent, and ritualistic. Hannah would later tell the podcast Texas Monthly that they took a police chaplain with them when they visited the cult site. Now, Hannah said he wanted the chaplain's religious experience to help him understand some of the symbols in the house. But he didn't turn away the chaplain's offer to bless the house before they went inside. I've been to some of those sites where there were symbols and signs that supported the idea that devil worship was going on inside. And even if it was just a bunch of dumb kids who listened to too much heavy metal music, These kinds of sites are incredibly disturbing, and I can attest that you get a terribly dark feeling when you go into these. So even though investigators were finding things that supported such a group existed, leads were drying up in the case. And the days, they turned into weeks, and then into months, then years, and sadly, decades, 3.5 of them. But it was during those early months, after the murders, that Shane's father received a call from a kid named John Gilbreth. Now, Gilbreth, he would later learn, also reached out to Sally's mother, stating that he had some really important information that he wanted to share with them. But first, he wanted them to tell him what they knew about the investigation, what they'd learned on their own, and what they'd learned from case detectives. Well, neither parent trusted Gilbreth. And instead of meeting with him personally, they told him to talk with police investigators. And as you might guess, Gilbreth never went to police. But they were looking at him as a person of interest behind the scenes. Now again, let's create a picture here. The late 1980s were steeped in the satanic panic phenomenon. People were blaming Dungeons and Dragons, heavy metal music, and trench coats. People dressed in black for every dark thing that was happening in America. But in San Angelo, it wasn't hysteria around here. It was happening. The cult that Sally and Shane tried to leave wasn't just a rumor. It left fingerprints, writings, weapons, rituals, and a trail of silence. And to the surviving family members and the police, Shane and Sally weren't killed by fiction. It was possible that they were killed by a secret that no one dared reveal. Some kind of an organized cult, maybe sex predators, and that there were even concerns that someone in law enforcement was involved. And then, many years later, in June of 2017, so that's about 8 years ago, a potential lead surfaced when that man named John Cyrus Gilbreth was arrested on drug-related charges after police made a traffic stop. Well, a search of his home revealed writings and audio tapes that were labeled with SS. And, get this, biological materials that investigators believed could be connected to Shane and Sally's murders. Now, when the murders occurred, Gilbreth was 17 years old, and he knew Shane and Sally. They were his peers and his schoolmates, and that becomes really important because it puts him there at that time and still hanging on to stuff that might suggest he's remembering. Well, he went to prison on drug charges, and the police were unable to develop anything further on the evidence, any evidence supposedly related to Shane and Sally. Now, they still have that evidence in their evidence lockers, and nobody's sharing what's on those tapes or in those documents. But over the years, the murders became the subject of media reports and documentaries like Unsolved Mysteries. The stories generated so many leads that police investigators were quickly overwhelmed. But in the end, nothing more than ghost stories circulated about town. Well, decades later, many people from San Angelo are still keeping some secrets. Shane's dad was quoted as saying that the teenagers at the time are now adults and they're carrying the burden of their silence. He said, quote, "They're just as guilty as the ones that pulled the trigger," close quote. And he would later tell Texas Monthly Podcast that there's another reason the story stayed alive. It's because it still haunts the people who lived the story. In every small Texas town, there are truths that are buried just beneath the mesquite and sun-baked soil. And let me tell you, the summer of 1988 may have buried Shane and Sally's secrets, but it won't always bury the truth. But the truth hasn't surfaced in the evidence that was recovered in Gilbreth's home. In fact, according to Texas Monthly, the evidence that was recovered included a fingernail and a hair. Why would somebody hang on to that? Well, after it was examined forensically, it was determined that it didn't match the victims. So who did it match? And hopefully they're doing some DNA testing to try to discover that. But people still visit Shane and Sally's graves. And as I sat here in the Belvedere Memorial Park, where these kids are buried alongside of each other, I took time to just kind of reflect on comments that were made by their parents on the 25th anniversary of their deaths. And I thought this would be kind of the appropriate place to share them. In fact, I'm just going to show some drone imagery as I fly in and go over Shane and Sally's grave right here. Now, Pat Wade, Sally's mother, and her stepfather, Bill Wayne, have lived this unimaginable nightmare. They didn't just lose a daughter. They lost a future. There's no wedding days, no grandchildren, no Christmas mornings, no homes that are filled with laughter and light. In fact, according to Pat, Sally loved everything that was living: dogs, cats, elderly people. She had a lot of empathy and a lot of patience. She wasn't into dolls or toys. She was into life, according to her mother. And she says that daffodils were her favorite flowers, something that Pat places every year at her graveside. Now, Sally's mom remembers the horror of seeing that body bag, a badly decomposed body. She could only place her daughter's prom dress alongside her remains in the casket. And for months, she would just come to the cemetery and sit here until her grief consumed her health. And at one point, she weighed only 86 pounds. Well, decades later, she still has nightmares. One nightmare in particular is Sally standing out in the field and somebody's coming up behind her, and the daughter is screaming for her mother who can't get to her and help her. What a terrible nightmare. Now, Shane's dad, Marshall Stewart, still feels the same pain he felt in 1988. He says that time has never softened the pain. It's only made the silence louder. Now, like Pat, Marshall visits the kids' graves often, and his faith gives him hope, and he says he's forgiven everybody that's involved in this case. He says he doesn't hold any more hate in his heart, but he still wants the truth to come out. He prays daily that somebody will finally come forward. And that's the reason why I'm doing this video, is to just get this thing out in front of the public one more time. Now, Marshall told Texas Monthly, "I don't want revenge. I want redemption. I want the person who knows to get right with themselves, that they got to get right with God. That's the only way there can be peace." Well, those people that know might have been in one of two circles of kids that were raising Cain in this area. One group was known as the Lost Boys. They styled themselves as vigilante misfits trying to clean up the streets. Think of the Outsiders meet Hot Topic. They wore jackets, cruised along the drag strip, and they tried to look cool. But the other group, they weren't just lighting candles. They were meeting at O.C. Fisher Lake, playing with Ouija boards, and in some cases, according to more than one witness that I haven't verified, conducting animal sacrifices. Now, one of Sally's friends even found a note that was folded in her jacket during the time she was still alive, talking about necromancers. Necromancers are a people who practice wizardry. So remember the friend who said Sally thought somebody might kill him? Boy, I'll tell you, all of these things seem to suggest that maybe all that smoke meant there was fire. Now, Valerie told the Texas Monthly podcast that 3 weeks before their deaths, Sally and Shane were making plans to leave Texas together. Sally was planning to join the Navy, and she told Valerie that if she didn't hear from them in 2 months, that they were probably dead. Well, she never heard from them again, but she still remembers Sally's chilling words: "They're going to kill us if we don't leave." And if this case didn't already have enough twists and turns, remember that former deputy who collected the gun from Shane and Sally, later stating he handed it off to the local police department? The deputy told the Texas Monthly podcast that he believes that the killer wasn't just in the cult, that he might have been a city cop. He attributed that to learning the weapon ended up in the personal closet of a police officer, that same police officer that he handed it to as evidence decades earlier. Now, according to the deputy, the weapon was never entered into evidence. There was no serial number logged, no ballistic tests run. It just disappeared. Now, I'd really like to see if that could be validated somehow, because I have a hard time, because I also remember reading that they said it was tied, that they knew it was a stolen weapon, and that it was tied to a robbery and possibly a murder. So that means it had to have been somewhere in the records. But this is all something that I'm kind of unsure about. So don't put too much emphasis on it other than there was an allegation made. Now, I say this because almost every case I've ever handled of organized cult activity involved the conspiracy theory that law enforcement was involved. I personally never confirmed any of those. But this case isn't just about cults or killers or even crooked cops. It's about what happens when we choose to silence justice. And as many of you know, I've spent a career studying cults, criminal conspiracies, and coercive control. The Shane and Sally case sits at the uncomfortable intersection of all three of those. It's a blueprint of how vulnerable kids are and how quickly they can be groomed, how institutions fail and how power protects itself. But it's also a story of grit, of parents who won't back down, of journalists who keep digging, and of memories that refuse to fade. You know, it's easy to create more confusion and create bigger ghost stories. For instance, I found a number of folks online who suggest that this image of Shane and Sally shows Sally's interest in the occult. The evidence of that to many people is devil-worshipping signs that she's making in this photo. So check it out, because this, many say, is the sign of the horns, a hand gesture, index and pinky fingers raised while the others fold down. It has deep roots in spiritual and cultural traditions. So remember this. It also has deep roots in Western pop culture, especially since the rise of heavy metal music in the 1970s, a symbol that has been transformed actually, and thanks largely to bands like Black Sabbath. The gesture morphed into a universal emblem of rebellion and rock and roll identity, but also devil worship. And unfortunately, as its use spread, so did misinterpretations. Because for many people outside the subculture, the horns were linked to devil worship and satanic rituals, particularly during the height of the 1980s satanic panic in America. Now, this might explain why many people, in my opinion, liken Sally's hand gestures to satanic worship. Perhaps it's because she and Shane were attending cult-like parties reportedly, and this was supported by spray-painted pentagrams, ritual-looking fires, and violent, evil videos of the era being recovered in these homes where this was happening. But I've found that many times these ghost stories are simply explained by normal activities. In this case, almost like a longhorn. Because while the sign of the horn's hand gesture has been linked to everything from ancient spiritual protection to satanic imagery and pop culture, in the state of Texas, where I'm standing right now, it might mean something entirely different, especially on game day. Because flashing this symbol in San Angelo, just west of Austin, Texas, isn't necessarily an homage to an occult. It's more likely a proud show of support for the University of Texas Longhorns, known as hook'em horns. This gesture is meant to mimic the head and curved horns of the school's mascot, a unifying salute that shouts and is shown by students, by alumni, and by fans alike during sporting events, especially football games here in Texas. But context matters, because while Texans see school pride, somebody in another part of the world might be seeing devil worship. Longhorns or the devil? What do you see? Put your comments down below, would you please? Well, we may never know the full truth about what happened to Shane and Sally, but we know enough to say this. They didn't die for nothing. They died because they knew too much, perhaps. And they tried to do what was right. And that, my friends, makes their story worth telling. And if you know what happened to these kids, it's time to step up and bring the families the truth they deserve. So please, share this story. Talk about it. Shine a light on it. If you know something, say something. Because silence doesn't protect, it condemns. And if you found this case compelling, you might want to check out my book, Deceived, an investigative memoir of the Zion Society cult. Now, Deceived explores similar themes of mind control, complicity, and the bravery that it takes to confront darkness. You can get signed copies if you live here in the United States from profilingevil.com, and I'll even ship it to you for free. But if you live anywhere else in the world, you can get Deceived or any of my other books on Amazon. And don't forget to subscribe to Profiling Evil on YouTube or wherever you get your audio podcasts. And if you like audio podcasts, make sure you're checking out Profiling Evil's audio podcasts on your favorite podcast platform. Make sure you're watching for us on Facebook, YouTube, Instagram, and Twitter. And when you visit our website, sign up for our digital newsletter, the BOLO. That stands for Be on the Lookout. And the only way you're going to get that thing is by signing up at profilingevil.com. Well, thanks for your support. And from San Angelo, Texas, we'll see you soon at the next crime scene.